Shabbat shalom, everybody. Good to see you. Good to see you. And Damien, what a delight to see you back. It's been a while. Good to have you here. Good to have you here. So, a few years ago, I think it was actually on Rosh Hashanah. There's one particular lady who was joining us at the time, not just for Rosh Hashanah, but also periodically throughout the year. Whenever we'd walk by in the main sanctuary with the Torah, she would have a comment that something wasn't right, whatever it happened to be. And this was Rosh Hashanah, so just imagine the sanctuary was packed. I know it's hard to imagine that in today's world, but it was packed. And we're walking around, and the Chazan is ahead of me, and I'm holding the Torah, and we're walking around behind. And I come up to them to wish them a good Yom Tov, and the lady says to me, "Rabbi, it's boiling hot in here. What are you going to do about it?" So, trying to keep things very light, I said to her, I'm really sorry, but you've got the wrong department. That's maintenance, and I'm in sales. So you have to speak to the head of the maintenance department. Now, since then, every time she sees me, she says, "I know, Rabbi, you're in sales. You told me that." So it's a way to diffuse it. But I sort of think about that quite a lot and sort of have a good laugh. But I am in sales. Think about it. What do I sell? I sell religion. I sell God. And I know it might seem strange to think about it, but as a rabbi, my job is to promote God, to promote Torah, and to encourage people to bring God into their lives. And we all know the expression. There's an expression that says that it's possible to have too much of a good thing. Is it possible to have too much God? I've always wondered about that. Some of the things you read and you see that people do in their fervent belief of what they believe God wants them to do. Now, in several places in the Torah, it either tells us or shows us that God is enormously powerful, incredibly, dangerously powerful. So powerful that coming too close to God is actually fatal. This week's Torah portion, Acharei Mot. We had two Torah portions. The first one, Acharei Mot. God tells us, through Moses, I should say. He says, pass on a warning. This is what God's telling Moses. Pass on a warning to your brother Aaron. Tell your brother that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain in front of the cover that is upon the ark. Because if he does, he will die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. It's a death warning, okay? Don't get too close to me, because if you do, I'll kill you. And this comes after the opening verse of the Torah portions, which tells us that this is happening just after the death of Aaron's sons. If you remember 2 weeks ago, Pashat Shmini, was it 2 weeks ago? Yeah, Shmini, where Aaron's sons were bringing an offering on the altar in the temple or the sanctuary. And what does God do? Smites them down, kills them dead on the spot, without any warning. The rabbis say, of course, that the death of Aaron's sons was mentioned to emphasize the point made to Aaron, that you could die. Just as you might listen to your doctor's orders more carefully if he says to you, you know what, you need to quit smoking or you could die. So just as we listen to the doctor, so this was a message from God to Moses to convey to Aaron. Listen to what I'm telling you. The death of Aaron's sons, of course, shows us how powerful God's presence could be. 1 minute they're there, the next minute they're gone. They died in the very presence of God when they offered a strange fire that the Lord had not commanded. He didn't tell them to bring it, they brought it, he killed them. Doesn't sound too comforting, but that's the way it is. The rabbis don't simply accept that as an explanation for why they died. They find it very difficult to come to terms with the fact that the all-loving and the omnipresent God would do that unless there was an underlying reason. Some rabbis say that they were killed because they were too full of themselves. Here they were, the sons of the high priest, wanting Moses and Aaron to die off already so that they could take over. Other rabbis connect their death with a warning that follows for the priests not to enter if they'd been drinking alcohol. They were drunk. And some rabbis even go to say that they were drunk and that's why they were killed. But perhaps something God told Moses provides a much simpler explanation. We don't have to look so deep. Because in Exodus chapter 33, after the whole episode of the golden calf, God becomes reconciled with the people. In a very intimate moment, what happens? Moses says to God, Hareini na et kavodecha. Please, God, show me your glory. And what does God respond? God responds that he will make his goodness pass before Moses and will proclaim his name, but, he says, you cannot see me. You must not see my face. No man may see me and live. Okay, there we got that death threat again. There are a number of different ways that the rabbis tried to understand this very mysterious statement, that the people cannot see God's face and live. Now, Nachmanides says it doesn't mean that you could actually physically see God and then die. Rather, it means before a person could even grasp the sight, they would be dead. Orach Chaim explains that you cannot see my face and live means that God was not intentionally withholding that vision from Moses. But what it means is that that it's just a fact, a law of nature, that a human being composed of skin and flesh and the spirit could not remain alive after truly seeing God. In other words, God is so powerful, it's like staring at the sun. If you stare at the sun for too long, you go blind. You can't see it, right? They tell you not to stare at the sun. It's not healthy. And the same thing. And God wanted Moses alive, so God refused to grant Moses' wish. Now, saying all that, if you know your Bible, you might argue that there are passages where people see God and they don't die. In Isaiah chapter 6, the prophets say, I have seen God seated on a throne. And one of the commentators, Chizkuni, tells us that this was not seeing with a clear vision, but at best, something like a reflection in a mirror. A heretic, and only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and left in peace. There is a story in the Talmud that warns against too much God. He said too much God is not a good thing. And there's a very famous story of 4 rabbis who went on a mystical journey. And I hear it all the time. People say to me, I'm going to search for my spiritual side. I'm going to search for the mystics. And there's a story told in the Talmud that 4 rabbis went on such a journey, and they entered through their meditating. They went into the heavenly realms. And we're told that one of the 4 went completely mad, went crazy after that. One died, one became a heretic, and only one rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, entered in peace and left in peace. None of the rabbis have an explanation of why we can't see God's face and live. I have a theory. And my theory is that maybe there is a limit to how much God we can handle. Maybe there's such a thing as a lethal dose of God. Now, for those of you who have any knowledge of the pharmaceutical world other than the medication perhaps you take during the day, you would know that the pharmaceutical world speak of what is called LD50. LD50 is the median lethal dose. And it's primarily used for drugs. The idea is to know what is the lethal dose of a drug that anybody's taking that could possibly kill them, okay? Even substances that we think of as healthy or benign can be fatal in high doses. Everyone knows alcohol can be fatal. The LD50 for alcohol has been calculated. Does anybody here drink alcohol? Anybody here have a l'chaim or schnapps? Yeah, it's okay. Do you have any idea how many single shots will kill you? Maybe you should, okay? Because there is a calculation that's done for alcohol that 13 shots of any distilled beverage, such as whiskey, 13 shots downed at the same time, one right after the other, will kill half the people who have it. Yeah, don't try. Do me a favor. We're not here anyway. The kiddish just have one or two or three, but that's it. But somewhat more surprising is that there's an LD50 for water. The LD50 for water is 6 liters. If you drink 6 liters of water too quickly, you can flush the electrolytes out of your bloodstream, resulting in what they call hyponatremia, excessively low sodium levels in your blood, which will kill you. Endurance athletes have died from drinking too much water, trying to rehydrate after a competition. People have died drinking too much water after consuming the drug ecstasy, which dehydrates people. One poor woman died after drinking too much water in a very foolish contest sponsored by a California radio station. And maybe, I was thinking this week, maybe, just maybe, there is an LD50 for God. Is God like alcohol, damaging even in small quantities and fatal in large quantities? Or is God like water, like giving an essential in the right amount and only lethal in very rare excessive exposure? I like to think that God, at least my God anyway, is like water. Life-giving and essential, even to the people who aren't aware of God's existence, and nurturing to the souls of those that seek God. I feel comfortable saying that none of us here is in danger from exposure of an excessive amount of God. Yeah. I can promise you. In fact, it is probably quite the opposite. The opposite is likelier to be true for your average person, that we actually suffer from an insufficient amount of God in our lives. Now, knowing that God is so powerful that too big a dose can be fatal serves to remind us of how far away from God most of us are most of the time. We don't feel that power most of the time. So, I think, as we wrap it up, I think like this, and I ask that God strengthen us in our efforts to draw close. And if we start getting too close for safety, I'm sure we will be practically overwhelmed by the power of God's presence before it becomes too dangerous and kills us. And may we all get to that point. Bimhera v'yameinu. Amen. We're going to... Thank you.